Hi there, this is Dr. John back talking about a famous early poem by T.S. Eliot, The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock, one of his most famous poems. About a week ago I posted something on Portrait of a Lady by Eliot, which preceded Prufrock and has some themes in common about a shy young man who goes to see a society lady and an elder lady, an older society lady who is interested in perhaps setting up some kind of relationship with him, and it emphasizes his shyness and his perhaps quiet arrogance, even as he tries to manipulate the lady's feelings in certain ways and perhaps gain something from the relationship without giving much back. So yeah, the young Eliot, we can say, was a shy young man, highly intellectual, perhaps admired by older ladies who liked art and culture, and saw him as someone who was handsome, young, and highly educated. So this theme is continued in Alfred Prufrock, J. Alfred Prufrock, although Eliot had actually made a change over to England by this time, had crossed the Atlantic and set himself up in a semi-permanent way in the UK, and met Ezra Pound, who commented on this poem and helped Eliot a lot, and was later to help him even more with The Wasteland. So not only are the themes similar to Portrait of a Lady, but also the actual poem structure. It's new, it's something different, it's based on old styles, traditional styles, many references to earlier poems, and yet at the same time it's very modern. You can call it free verse. It's lines of varying length with occasional rhymes, or many rhymes actually, but there's no particular structure to the rhymes, and the verse just flows freely most of the time, although it has that traditional feel for much of the while. I think the best way to do this is just perhaps read it in pieces and comment on each part. So let's read the first part. I think that the title itself is a little bit ironic. It sounds odd, like it's about someone who is rather nerdy. J. Alfred Prufrock sounds very prim and proper. Someone who would be very guarded, and yet it's a love song, so it's a love song of somebody who's very prim and proper and guarded. So that's really, it gives us a clue about the poem from the beginning. So let's just read the first part, if I can bring it up. Let's see, where is it? Okay, right. I'm saying right, but I can't find it. Yeah, here it is. The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock. It has a quotation from Dante's Inferno at the beginning, and it's not going to give most people much of a clue about what the poem is about. About somebody who has died, and talking about coming back from the dead. So perhaps again some kind of reference to this shy young man who feels like he knows a lot, but can't really express his emotions. So let's read the famous first part. Let us go then, you and I, when the evening is spread out against the sky, like a patient etherized upon a table. Let us go through certain half-deserted streets, the muttering retreats of restless nights in one-night cheap hotels, and sawdust restaurants with oyster shells, streets that follow like a tedious argument of insidious intent to lead you to an overwhelming question. Oh, do not ask, what is it? Let us go and make our visit. So there's a kind of strong irony in these lines from the beginning. A man who is very self-conscious, looking at himself, his own reactions, thinking about the way other people will respond to him. A man who basically seems to think too much. A young man who is full of education and thought, but wants to be in love. He wants to feel passionate and beyond his learning, and he finds it very difficult to express himself except in terms of irony and intellectual meanderings. So let us go then, you and I, when the evening is spread out against the sky. So is he with somebody going somewhere, or is he talking about himself, maybe his persona and his real self, something like that? Probably the latter, I would think. So talking to the two people within himself, the real him and the face he is going to create for the people in the get-together that he's heading for. So let's take it from that point of view, and perhaps we can make more sense of it that way. Let us go then, you and I, when the evening is spread out against the sky. So something odd from the beginning there. Let us go then, you and I. Okay, it's a short line. And then followed by a very long line, but that rhymes. When the evening is spread out against the sky. And yet the scansion is perfect. But the overall effect is odd. One very short line followed by a long line and a very full rhyme. Like a patient etherized upon a table. Well, that's a strange image for a start. Not something you would expect to find in a traditional poem from the 19th or 18th or 17th century. So it's something definitely new kind of image, like a patient etherized upon a table. We can assume that probably Eliot himself is a patient etherized upon a table. He needs to drug himself in order to go out and meet these people, because he is so shy that he's overwhelmed by this feeling, this ominous feeling of needing to present himself before the people at the gathering. Can he present his real self, or must he present a face that will get him through the evening? It will be clear as we go on, I guess. So, yeah, he's moving towards the destination. Let us go then through certain half-deserted streets, the muttering retreats of restless nights in one-night cheap hotels, and sawdust restaurants with oyster shells, streets that follow like a tedious argument of insidious intent. So there's this ominous feeling about it. It seems more important than simply going to some kind of social get-together, and that's because the writer, the poet, is feeling so nervous. He's feeling so nervous. It seems like a big event in his life. Is there someone there that he is particularly afraid of meeting? A woman, perhaps? He doesn't think he'll be able to explain himself and do himself justice to somebody he likes a lot. Perhaps let's continue. So, to lead you to an overwhelming question, oh, do not ask what is it, let us go and make our visit. So, yeah, he will need to ask himself the overwhelming question, which is, can he express his emotions, or is he just stuck in this kind of solipsistic mind where he can't reach out to other people? I think that's something like what he means. In the room, the women come and go, talking of Michelangelo. This is a very famous line. What does it mean? It's difficult to say exactly, but obviously it's some kind of social gathering of intellectual people or people with aspirations to high culture. And they're going to be talking about cultural things, and it's rather difficult for this young man, probably because he actually knows quite a lot about this, but he sort of feels that probably the people he'll come in contact with are not serious about that, and he might make a fool of himself because he won't know how to get away from all the cultural talk into something more emotional. So it's very challenging for him. Let's go on. The yellow fog that rubs its back upon the window panes, the yellow smoke that rubs its muzzle on the window panes, licked its tongue into the corners of the evening, lingered upon the pools that stand in drains, that fall upon its back, and the soot that falls from chimneys, slipped by the terrace, made a sudden leap, and seeing that it was a soft October night, curled once about the house and fell asleep. This is rather suggestive of an image that came from Portrait of a Lady. I can't remember the exact section, but you can see that it's a development of something from that poem. So the image of the smoke becoming like a cat is very interesting, and it's really building up the mood of fear, I think, and an ominous looking forward to what lies ahead later in the evening. And then he goes off, he develops the image even more. And indeed, there will be time for the yellow smoke that slides along the street, rubbing its back upon the window panes. There will be time to prepare a face to meet the faces that you meet. There will be time to murder and create, and time for all the works and days of hands that lift and drop a question on your plate. Time for you and time for me. Time for 100 indecisions and for 100 visions and revisions before the taking of a toast and tea. Well, that's a bit reminiscent of Portrait of a Lady too, where the cultural event of a younger man going to meet an older woman who has a romantic interest in him is kind of swollen up into something bigger than it would seem to be to most people. It's obviously very important to him. And there is an overwhelming question that is going to be dropped on his plate, and he's going to have 100 indecisions and visions and revisions before the taking of a toast and tea. So, yeah, there's going to be a lot going on here in his mind, and there will be the fear of whether he can transition from talking about culture to showing his emotions, and he is fearful about this. The line is repeated about Michelangelo. Next, in the room, the women come and go talking of Michelangelo. And then there is repetition, that the feeling of an echo of words and lines coming back again. And indeed, there will be time to wonder, do I dare, and do I dare? Time to turn back and descend the stair with the bald spot in the middle of my hair. They will say, how his hair is growing thin. My morning coat, my collar mounting firmly to the chin. My necktie rich and modest, but asserted by a simple pin. They will say, but how his arms and legs are thin. Do I dare disturb the universe? In a minute there is time for decisions and revisions, which a minute will reverse. Again, the idea of this young, shy, highly educated man, very self-conscious, very aware of how people perceive him, very fearful of how people perceive him, very conscious of his limitations, or actually making more of them than he should. He knows he looks elegant, but he has the bald spot in the middle of his hair. Will they notice it, or will they say his arms and legs are thin? So he's overconscious of every aesthetic aspect of his own appearance to other people, and how he seems to them, and he overthinks everything, and he's continually thinking about the way other way people see him, and what he perceives to be his weaknesses in their eyes. For I have known them all, already known them all, have known the evenings, mornings, afternoons. I have measured out my life with coffee spoons. I know the voices dying with dying fall beneath the music from a further room, so how should I presume? And I have known the eyes already, known them all, the eyes that fix you in a formulated phrase, and when I am formulated sprawling on a pin, when I am pinned and wriggling on the wall, then how should I begin to spit out all the butt ends of my days and ways, and how should I presume? Yeah, so this makes it clear that he's really fearful of being formulated by the people at the gathering that he is going to. He feels that they will label him like you label a butterfly or an insect, and they'll formulate him with a phrase that will dismiss his complexity and his feelings, and just he will simply be okay. He's kind of boring, shy young man who knows a lot but can't express his emotions. So yeah, that's probably how a lot of people will see him, and he's terribly frightened of having all his complexity reduced to something like this. He says, I have measured out my life with coffee spoons, a very famous phrase. We know from Portrait of a Lady that this is not the first time he's been going to these social gatherings and trying to get involved with ladies romantically. So yeah, he's measured out his life with coffee spoons. He's been at so many of these social gatherings, and yet he's never been able to feel easy or confident at any time. So I have known them all, the eyes that fix you in a formulated phrase, and when I am formulated sprawling on a pin, when I am pinned and wriggling on the wall, then how should I begin? Yeah, so he feels that if they reduce him to some kind of stereotype of a shy young man who is well educated, he just won't be able to show who he really is deep down. And on the one hand, he wants to impress them with his high education and his youth and the fact that he's handsome, but on the other, he knows that he's very, very shy and inexperienced, and that he can't possibly avoid them knowing that, and this creates fear in him. He will not be able to appear to these people as he would like to appear, as a confident, bold young man who is educated and knows many things about a lot of cultural issues. He thinks he will just seem silly to them. Let's go on. Now there is change as he becomes more romantic, more aesthetic. What's he missing out on? And I have known the arms, already known them all. Arms that are braceleted and white and bare, but in the lamplight, downed with light brown hair. Is it perfume from a dress that makes me so digress? Arms that lie along a table or wrap around a shawl? And should I then presume? And how should I begin? So there's a lot of repetition here, but he has made a change. He's talking about the things that inspire him romantically. So when he goes to one of these get-togethers, he will see the young ladies with their hair their body hair highlighted in the lamp, and this is what turns him on, the aesthetic awareness of beauty, which is a bit sort of unusual perhaps, and he knows it's a kind of weakness too. It's something that will distract him. So although he seems to know so much, he's very defenseless really when it comes to his aesthetic preferences and what will turn him on romantically. Shall I say, I have gone at dusk through narrow streets and watched the smoke that rises from the pipes of lonely men in shirt sleeves leaning out of windows. I should have been a pair of ragged claws scuttling across the floors of silent seas. This is a very famous line. I should have been a pair of ragged claws scuttling across the floors of silent seas. What I get from it is he thinks that he should have been something that didn't have any emotion, something that just lived, something that moved, something that is, something that didn't have to worry about emotional matters. But life would have been easier like that, and that's how he seems to be anyway, somebody who can't really cope with emotions, and his existence would have been easier if he had just simply been a pair of ragged claws that wasn't expected to cope emotionally with different kinds of circumstances. And the afternoon, the evening, sleeps so peacefully, smoothed by long fingers, asleep, tired, or it malingers, stretched on the floor, here beside you and me. Should I, after tea and cakes and ices, have the strength to force a moment to the crisis? But though I have wept and fasted, wept and prayed, though I have seen my head grown slightly bald, brought in upon a plate, I am no prophet, and here's no great matter. I have seen the moment of my greatness flicker, and I have seen the eternal footman hold my coat and snicker, and in short, I was afraid. So this is continuing the same thing. I think there is consistency here. It's pretty obvious what he's talking about. So yeah. So when he's talking about being beside you and me, I think it's changing all the time. The person he's talking to, often he's talking to himself, and the two people within himself, these confident young intellectual and the shy young romantic. But then it can change also to perhaps somebody who he's thinking about who will be at the gathering, probably a young lady. If he meets her, will he have the strength to force the moment to a crisis amid the tea and cakes and ices? So it's clear, I think, what he's talking about. but he compares himself to John the Baptist, the prophet, and says, I have wept and fasted, wept and prayed, and though I have seen my head grown slightly bald, ironic, brought in upon a platter, like John the Baptist, I am no prophet, and here's no great matter. I've seen the moment of my greatness flicker, and in short, I was afraid. So back to the old theme of the shy young man seeing himself on, comparing himself or his situation to great literary and cultural and philosophical and religious analogies, and yet really just being a shy young man who can't cope with their emotional situation. He doesn't think he'd be able to force a moment to a crisis when he sees the young woman that he wants to get involved with at the cultural gathering. Sorry about that horrible noise in the background. It's a singing garbage truck, believe it or not. So I mistimed my analysis, and unfortunately, we will have to deal with that and just blot it out. And then there's a repetition again. I think it's gone now. And would it have been worth it after all, after the cups of marmalade and the tea, among the porcelain, among some talk of you and me? Would it have been worthwhile to have bitten off the matter with a smile, to have squeezed the universe into a ball, to roll it towards some overwhelming question, to say, I am Lazarus, come from the dead, come back to tell you all, I shall tell you all, if one, settling a pillow by her head, should say, that is not what I meant at all, that is not it at all. So all sorts of references here to Hamlet, to Andrew Marvell, and to his coy mistress, so squeezing the universe into a ball. In the Marvell poem, he's talking about how need to act quickly in order to achieve emotional union with a lady, because time is short and life won't last long. But it's unlikely that this shy young man is going to be able to take Marvell's advice. And again, he's comparing himself to Lazarus, come back from the dead, but he's going to tell you all, but he's not actually sure what it is he's going to say. The contrast between all the cultural analogies, which kind of big him up in one sense, and the reality that he's just a shy young man on the other side who can't say what he wants to the woman he wants to relate to. If one, settling a pillow by her head, should say, that is not what I meant at all, that's not it at all. So he wants to express his emotions, and yet he can't. He can talk about literature, he can talk about culture, philosophy, but he's afraid that he will not be able to express what the emotions he feels deep down inside. And would it have been worth it after all? So he's not going to bother. Would it have been worth it after all? It becomes conditional, so probably he won't be able to, and he won't say anything. And would it have been worth it after all? Would it have been worthwhile after the sunsets and the dooryards and the sprinkled streets, after the novels, after the teacups, after the skirts that trail along the floor, and this and so much more? It's impossible to say just what I mean, but as if a magic lantern through the nerves and patterns on a screen, would it have been worthwhile if one, settling a pillow, throwing off a shawl, and turning toward the window, should say, that is not it at all, that is not what I meant at all? This is a famous section. From a structural point of view, it's very interesting. That specific technique he uses of traditional kinds of patterns from the past and meters and rhymes, but put together in a fragmentary way, which incorporates lines of varying lengths and occasional rhymes too, is to the fore here. It is impossible to say just what I mean. What's that? That's 13 syllables to the line. And it's a very varying kind of meter. It is impossible to say just what I mean. And then, but as if a magic lantern threw the nerves and patterns on a screen. How long is that? But as if a magic lantern threw the nerves and patterns on a screen. 16 or 17 syllables in that line. And very fascinating image, like the patient etherized up on a table. He can't express himself, and it's as if the magic lantern, which is a projector of some kind, of course. At this time, the idea of film was a new one. As if magic lantern threw the nerves and patterns on a screen. That's how he feels. Can't express his emotions. If he had been able to, would it have been worthwhile anyway? As if one settling a pillow or throwing off a shawl, turning toward the window, should say, that is not it at all. That is not what I meant at all. So it probably wouldn't have been worthwhile. And he can't express himself, and if he tried, he wouldn't have been able to, and he just wouldn't have been able to say what he meant. So he's gone from asking himself if he would be able to express himself to the lady he likes at this gathering, to saying he's pretty sure now that he won't bother, and anyway, he's sure it would have been a disaster if he had tried. So it's all about total failure, right? And then he talks about himself and why he won't try, and why it would have been a failure if he did, because he's just a rather boring person who maybe is like Polonius from Hamlet, the father of Laertes, who is a pedant, an old man who is full of dryness. That's what he feels himself to be, although he's a young man. No, I am not Prince Hamlet, nor was meant to be. I am an attendant lord, one that will do to swell a progress, start a scene or two, advise the prince, no doubt an easy tool, deferential, glad to be of use, politic, cautious and meticulous, full of high sentence and a bit obtuse, at times indeed almost ridiculous, almost at times a fool. So that's what he is. He's not a dry old man, he's a dry young man, and he can't express himself emotionally, although again he does big himself up by comparing himself with characters and great plays and things, but the reality is he can't express himself emotionally. I grow old, I shall wear the bottoms of my trousers rolled. So although he's a young man, he's like an old man inside, and what is daring for him is to make some small statement of fashion. He will just wear the bottom of his trousers rolled, or he will dare to eat a peach or something. So he's all dry like an old man, even though he's young. Shall I part my hair behind? Another little example of being bold for him. He can only be bold in small ways. He doesn't have the strength to express himself in emotional terms, or the ability to express himself in emotional terms. So he can only make these small changes. Do I dare to eat a peach? I shall wear white flannel trousers and walk upon the beach. So he can make a fashion statement, a small fashion statement, and hope that people will look at him and admire him. But when it comes to actually talking and expressing his emotions, that's beyond him. I have heard the mermaids singing each to each. He's heard them, but he can't communicate with them, and he can't get what he wants from them. The ability to become part of a real emotional relationship. I do not think that they will sing to me. I have seen them riding seaward on the waves, combing the white hair of the waves blown back. When the wind blows the water white and black, I have lingered in the chambers of the sea, by seagulls wreathed with seaweed, red and brown, till human voices wake us and we drown. So it's just a kind. It finishes with just a kind of fantasy that he has. He's talking about walking on the beach and hearing the mermaids singing each to each, but he says he does not think that they will sing to him because he cannot express himself emotionally. So the beautiful ladies that he wants to react with, they will not really be interested in him because he's unable to express himself emotionally. He can hear them. He can hear them like he can hear mermaids or people, women in his literary imagination singing out like the sirens in the Odyssey. He can imagine how beautiful it would be to be a part of that world, and yet he knows that he will not be because he is just a shy and dry young man who can't express himself emotionally. So that's what the poem is about, really, about a trip by a shy, dry young man to some kind of cultural event where there will be lots of people talking about art and culture, and there's probably someone there that he is thinking about specifically, and yet he feels he won't be able to speak to her because he is inept from an emotional point of view. So during the journey he decides that he won't even try, and we don't know if he actually went to the cultural get-together or whether he never even bothered turning up. If he did turn up, then he presumably didn't even try to relate to the person that he was thinking about because he just thought it would be hopeless and he would not be able to do it. So it's a fascinating poem from the point of view of meaning, but much more interesting, I would think, from the structural point of view. There are things here which English poetry had never seen before. The long monologue style, which is in fact based largely on Browning's monologues, I would think, and also monologues from Shakespeare. There's a mixture of the two. And the varying lines of free verse of different lengths and occasional rhyming without any strict pattern, and yet so many references to past poetry, and a general form which gives the idea of someone who knows a lot about past poetry and is bringing it up to date in a modern way. So it's perfectly easy to understand why Ezra Pound and others of the time thought that this was a quintessentially modern poem which was breaking new ground. And of course it was soon to lead to Eliot's masterpiece, The Wasteland. So I hope that this was useful. If so, hit the subscribe button and like the video. Thanks a lot.